Good morning. It's 9:30, and we're going to go on and get started. But before we get going, I'm going to ask Representative Buckner if she would open us in a word of prayer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you would, our gracious Heavenly Father, we are so grateful for another beautiful day in the state of Georgia, our home state that we love so much. We ask, Lord, that you open our eyes and our ears so that we can hear and see what we need to do to help our citizens with the issues and concerns that we face today, not just on this committee, but all the others. We are grateful for the many blessings you've bestowed upon us, and we appreciate and know that you will hear this prayer, that we need your help, and we ask for it, and we humbly thank you for it. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Thank you, Representative. All right, just a brief recap of where we are. We had our first meeting down at Lake Oconee. It was a very well-attended meeting. This is meeting two, and meeting two got delayed by Mother Nature, and we still have people out there in our state that are struggling and getting back on their feet. So we want to continue to think about them and do what we can to help them. Today, well, just to introduce myself, for those that don't know, I'm Trey Rhodes. I represent District 124, which is Putnam, Greene, Tolliver, Oglethorpe, and up into the east side of Clark County. This has been a measure that has been kind of on the forefront in my district for a number of years, and we just wanted to take a look at it. So that's why we're here. And at this time, I want to let the panel introduce themselves to you, and we're going to start down there with, what number are you? 24. 24, okay.
Good morning. My name is Beth Camp, and I represent District 135, which is West Central Georgia.
Representative Robert Dickey from Middle Georgia, represent 5 counties there.
I'm Jason Shaw with the Georgia Public Service Commission.
Jason Ridley, I represent District 6, which is Murray County, Whitfield County, and part of Gordon County.
I'm Debbie Buckner. I represent House District 137, which is Meriwether, Muskogee, Talbot, and Troup counties.
Thank you. To my left, I have Patrick Malk, who is our representative from Legislative Council, and we've got Grace Feeney over in the corner, who works in our office and helps us put these things together. Excuse me. So just the agenda for today, we're going to hear from the state first, and then we're going to hear from the PSC, and then we're going to open it up for public comment. So at this time, we will let the state come to the mic. And I don't see. Oh yeah, there you are. Okay.
Good morning.
Good.
And my understanding, and I apologize if I was mistaken, was that I was to answer any questions or provide any other clarification following the meeting that we had about a month and a half ago.
Okay. Since our last meeting and since some things that we've been talking about, does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask EPD on their role with private water companies? Representative Butler.
I had the opportunity to talk to the director and ask for some information about water quality issues and if there was a difference in the way private systems handled reporting and the monitoring of water quality issues compared to the difference between municipal and private systems and their reporting and their requirements. And I was wondering if you could just kind of tell us what that difference is, if there is one, and what they do report.
Absolutely. So in terms of general reporting requirements, there's no difference between publicly owned and privately owned water systems. They're both required to conduct and provide consumer confidence reports that provide general water quality information to all of the customers and consumers of that water. They're also required to follow the exact same health-based standards. So we've got maximum contaminant levels, MCLs, that all water systems, regardless of whether they're publicly owned or privately owned, have to comply with. For us, there's not a significant difference in terms of the actual requirements, especially related to water quality, between privately owned and publicly owned systems. There are small differences in terms of how we might view financing structures or funding structures, but in terms of the actual water quality, in terms of the actual requirements, there's no across-the-board difference between privately owned and publicly owned public water systems.
So that means that there's no difference in what they report. Is there any difference in the essence of the reports? Okay.
Nope, they're held to the same standards. We are required by the Safe Drinking Water Act, because we have delegated authority from EPA to implement the Safe Drinking Water Act here in Georgia, to make sure that all water that is provided to consumers and citizens meets certain quality requirements, and that does not differ depending on who provides that water.
Okay. Thank you.
I've got a quick question, because it's one I get a lot. Is taste and smell also in those categories of safe water?
So taste and smell can be sometimes associated with something called a secondary maximum contaminant level. So a primary MCL, or a primary maximum contaminant level, is for something that has a health-based or could cause some sort of harm. So think about, for example, the amount of arsenic that is in water. That's very tightly regulated. But then there are also things that could potentially provide kind of an off-putting odor or an off-putting color that necessarily won't cause any harm to people. And in some cases, those are regulated as sort of secondary maximum contaminant levels, or MCLs. Manganese, which can turn the water a little bit of a funnier color, is one of the examples of a secondary MCL. So generally speaking, taste and odor issues, if they're not related to anything, if it's not health related, then potentially there's a secondary MCL that would cover it. But otherwise, that is really just a customer concern that can be addressed directly with the water system.
Thank you. Representative Ridley.
On that, so I've seen some pictures of people that had a lot of sediment in their bathroom, like their bathtubs, whenever they were doing it at the last meeting, I think, and since then. So is that fall under that? Is that fall under a customer? I guess the customer would go talk directly to the water company.
So if there's a lot of sediment, if there's a lot of sedimentation, we do actually measure for TSS, and there are reporting requirements on it. I do understand, though, that sometimes when there's work within a water system, that shaking, that moving of the pipe can stir some stuff up, could potentially release some things that had been settled. In those cases, yes, the first point of contact would be that public water system, and understanding why they're seeing that sediment and hopefully putting in a complaint or getting some response or resolution to that.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, Representative, is it Dickey?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here. And a little bit, I want to do a little shout out. Thank you for what EPD is doing for our farmers in Southwest Georgia with some permitting and some changes, which doesn't have anything to do with this committee, but thank you for that. I do have a question about permitting of new wells for private and public municipal system. What is the process the same if they need to put in new wells or from surface water, either one? What's that process like?
Absolutely. So if you're putting in a new water source for a municipal public water system, you're first going to need to identify where you're getting that water from, groundwater or surface water. And then you have to work with our water supply program to make sure that that amount of water can be withdrawn from that particular source. You also are going to be working with the drinking water program on source water assessment to understand the quality of that water. There will also be engineering and design documents that are submitted to the drinking water program for their review as part of their permitting process. So there is a lot on the front end in terms of understanding what the level of treatment is going to be, where that water source is coming from, and making sure that water source is supported for those municipal public water systems.
Okay.
Chairman Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In talking to some of my colleagues in other states that do, where their public service commissions or public utility commissions do regulate private water systems, they tell me that they really get a huge volume of calls in terms of not just about rates and so forth, but probably more so about quality issues and you know, where that could be color, smell, anything like that. Is that something that currently that y'all feel like you get a high volume of calls about, or not so many? I was just curious.
So because EPD regulates the public water systems, we manage the drinking water permits. If we do get a call or complaint like that, we tend to refer it back down to the public water system. And the public water systems themselves have usually their own customer care process and are working within the community to get that feedback and to get those complaints. So those don't come to us as directly as, for example, a sewer spill or some other issues, which, you know, EPD tends to be one of the first folks out there to address those specific issues. We understand that there are calls that come in like that, but we just don't get nearly as many of them as I anticipate that the public water systems would be getting.
I mean, just kind of common knowledge for those of us that live in the southern part of the state. We're fortunate to have the Florida aquifer. We've got a plentiful water source, but at the same time, if you go below, like where I'm from, if you go below a couple 100 feet, which would be considered a deep well, which obviously for a municipal or a private system would definitely be deeper than that. But you start getting that sulfur smell, that rotten egg smell, and it's not harmful. It's just kind of commonplace where we're from. But let's say you take somebody that's not from there and they move there, the first thing they think is, you know, this water's terrible. But it's very common. And I know there's techniques and technology to mitigate most of that, but sometimes you can only do so much. But so you do get calls about that, but that answers my question. You just refer it back to the water system.
That's right. And if there are health concerns, then we also want to work with, if we do get a complaint, we always follow up with the public water system to see how it's been addressed. And if we start dealing with things where we have some oversight over, like a health-based violation, you know, those MCLs I was talking about earlier, we do want to make sure that we've got good compliance with our public water systems and all their requirements. So there's follow-up there. But oftentimes the things that you're mentioning, the water does taste different in different parts of the state. It comes from different sources. And sometimes that's just the local flavor. It does not actually harm human health. It's not something that necessarily needs to be treated unless the public water system identifies it as something that they want to do for their customers.
And I apologize if you've already answered this, if this question's already come up in the prior meeting, but I'm just couldn't remember like how many total water systems are y'all currently administering?
We have about 2,400 permits for public water systems here in Georgia.
And probably the majority of those are pretty small systems.
Yes, sir. So when you look at that number, the vast majority of those are for small systems.
Yeah. I know since this issue has come up and the study committee has taken place, I've tried to take it upon myself to learn more about just in my area about how many of these water systems there are, and I had no idea there was that many, but you don't think about it till you get into this. But
Well, can I just say, I think now we've got about 367 private water systems. Is that?
We have more than that. So we actually have, and I left my notes down in my seat. I'm happy to grab that to get you the exact number. But we have a lot of privately owned public water systems because you know, when we think of a public water system, the first thing that I think of at least is a large city or a county. But those are definitely public water systems, but we also have some smaller categories of public water systems. We have things called non-transient, non-community water systems, which capture things like prisons or schools, where you have the same population drinking that water, but not living there necessarily. And then you also have something called transient non-community water systems. And these are things like a restaurant, for example, that has its own well, or a Dollar General that's on a well, where you don't necessarily have the same people there all the time, but you are serving water, right? You are providing the water directly to customers or using that water. And so when you think about Georgia, you know, we think about a couple of these big cities, big counties, but there are parts of the state where the Dollar Generals, where the high schools, where the restaurants all have their own wells, and each of those comes up as a privately owned public water system.
Thank you, Chairman Kemp.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for being here today, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. This question is kind of following up on Commissioner Shaw's. When someone does have a complaint, you know, you said you refer them back to the public water or the private water system. If it's not health-based, like the sediment for example, and it's not truly a health base, does EPD have any jurisdiction at all to help the private water system comply?
No, so if it's not something that's related to our rules or regulations, if it's not something that is a permit requirement or otherwise a requirement that we would oversee, then we would not. We would be happy to provide technical assistance and work with the system to answer questions or connect them to a peer that may be able to help them address that specific issue. But without that regulatory hook, it wouldn't be in our jurisdiction. We wouldn't be able to do anything directly about that.
All right. Mr. Chairman, may I follow up?
Absolutely.
Thank you for answering that. That was helpful. So what would be the recourse for someone who lived in a neighborhood of 60 homes and they had issues with their water that were not health related? What would be the recourse if their private water system were not able to correct it?
That is certainly a challenging situation. In our experience, most of the public water systems, whether they're publicly or privately owned, do want to work with the people who are purchasing that water. They do have an emphasis on customer service and support. So my experience has been that working with the system tends to resolve a lot of the issues. Where those issues remain, I think that folks have worked within their communities to try to get them addressed.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. You're 22.
Yeah, just a follow-up on that line of questioning is that common? You mentioned a regulatory hook. Is that the way it's done in Georgia, the way your regulatory model and the statutory that governs it, is that normal, or do other states have more regulatory authority with regards to the quality issues?
So typically, when I talk to other states, my understanding is that while there might be a couple of states that are going ahead on different water quality concerns, the majority of the states follow what EPA does and sort of sticks to the requirements under the Safe Drinking Water Act and the authorities that we are granted therein. So, certainly can think of examples where some states have thought about things like emerging contaminants, such as forever chemicals, which recently EPA made some actions on. Some states were ahead of the game, ahead of EPA on addressing those. But for the most part, the states tend to follow that framework for the Safe Drinking Water Act.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Ridley.
Talking about private waters, I know like in LJ, there's a lot of up in the mountains, they'll build a small subdivision, they'll have a tank that fills up. And then I guess that comes from the city water, but then the private water owns the lines and all that kind of stuff. So if there's any problem beyond that point, then I guess they're responsible for it. And that has to be permitted, is that correct? You have to be is that a different type of permit than like say Piedmont Water has, or is there different levels of those?
Potentially. So there are two things that we'd be looking at there. We have different requirements for community public water systems, non-transient, non-community, and transient non-community water systems. Those different classes I talked about, like the city versus the school versus the restaurant, just because there's different levels of exposure and also different amounts of infrastructure, different populations served. That's the other thing that sometimes causes a difference. So small systems below 3,300 sometimes have fewer requirements than those that are larger, because again, we're connecting back to thinking about how many assets they have to manage, how are they running that system. So the health requirements stay the same, but we understand that smaller systems may have other operational challenges, or in some cases fewer operational challenges because they got fewer lines. The situation that you described sounded a little bit like a purchase water system, where there was a water system that was providing water to customers, but they weren't treating the water themselves. They were purchasing the water already treated from a different source. And then those would actually be coded in our system as a purchase water system, and we would be regulating them as a purchase water system.
Okay. And so going off of that, let's not talk about that part then because it'll get confusing. But a larger water system, like the one we're talking about here, they get a permit, and then that gives them X amount of population, I guess. Is that?
So for a privately owned public water system, their permit is going to be for a number of sources. So they're going to tell us exactly where they're getting the water from, whether it's wells, whether it's purchased water, whether it's a surface water source. Then they're also going to tell us the exact number of connections that we permit them for. So if you're talking about county or city government, the county or city government, we're not telling them you're going to serve 10 connections or 10 homes. We're saying, here are your sources, and you're free to serve your population. Some of them also actually go through a process with us to get delegated authorities. They can approve little expansions, like adding in new service lines and things like that. But for a privately owned public water system, we tell them right off the bat, based on the information they give us, based on the application that they submit, how many connections they're going to be serving off of that permit. So if they're serving 100 houses, the permit says 100 houses.
Okay, and so if they want to expand or anything, they have to get another permit?
Yes, sir. They would have to modify that permit to add on the additional connections.
And when they do that, do y'all have to go back and do a complete, I guess, is it just an add-on, or do you have to go through and do a complete inspection all over again from the start?
So there are potentially elements that don't have to be revisited. For example, if the sources aren't changing and we've got a good assessment and a good understanding of how much that source can provide, then that might be in good shape. But if they are adding enough connections that triggers them into or trips them up into a different category of monitoring, they might have to monitor in more locations or things like that, then we would want to work with them. We'd do a full assessment. But really it is a permitting process, right? Because to get those additional connections, you do have to modify the permit. So we are really looking at it again with fresh eyes and saying, what exactly do we need to review? What exactly do we need to update to allow these additional connections on the permit?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Commissioner?
Sorry.
No, go ahead, buddy.
Just new questions keep
Yes,
popping
sir.
up as you talk.
Yes, sir.
You can tell I have a lot to learn here. I know in the last meeting it was discussed about the percentage of surface water that Piedmont uses, and I assume that is a unique situation just because of the lake country and the abundance of water from the lake and the difficulty, in terms of pulling the water through the wells in that region, that Piedmont region. Is that common to use surface water, or is that unique? Do you know what the percentages are of all these systems that use well water or purchased water, or or the surface water?
For privately owned public water systems, surface water is not a very common option. Surface water tends to be more expensive to treat. It tends to be a little bit harder to treat. So you need to have an operator who can do that kind and run that kind of plant. But as you noted, in the Piedmont area, you got to have a mix of surface and groundwater sources just based on what water is available. But if you were to look at all of our privately owned public water systems, the majority of them are on groundwater.
But some do use surface water. Okay.
Yes, sir. And for our large cities, especially when you're coming into the northern part of the state, right, when you are kind of above the fall line, the Macon, Columbus, Augusta, when you go above that area, the majority of water source there is from surface water. There are some pockets in North Georgia where you can get some really good groundwater. Just by good, I mean in terms of volume. The water quality is good throughout the state, but we're much more volume limited where we don't have the Floridan aquifer, for example, than where we do.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, so just to summarize a bunch of questions, basically the state takes care of the safety, but has nothing to do with the regulation of pricing on private water companies of rates or any of that stuff, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you so much. There are no more questions, right? Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
All right, now we're going to turn it over to the PSC. Glad to have you guys.
Good morning. My name's Tom Bond. I'm Director of Utilities at the Public Service Commission. As you know, we don't currently regulate water. So what I was going to describe today is what we do and how we do it as far as the economic regulation of investor-owned utilities. Right now we do electric, natural gas, and telecom. Economic regulation from our standpoint essentially means that we set the rates, terms, and conditions in ways that are meant to be just and reasonable. Rates obviously include, the amount of the commodity or service you use, the number of kilowatt hours. But in setting rates, we also set base charges, late fees, disconnect charges, reconnect charges, any charges that a utility is allowed to charge a customer. The commission would be setting those rates. Terms and conditions are typically the policies and rules of the road, so to speak, that the utility has to follow. Terms of conditions can mean how much time do they have to give the customer before they shut them off for non-pay? What rules do they have for connecting and disconnecting customers? When can they charge late fees? It can even include, service quality standards and things like that. And you really, if you're going to engage in the economic regulation of a company, you really need to do both. If you only try to regulate the rates, but you don't regulate the terms of service, you're not going to get very far. So for the companies that we do regulate, we regulate both of those areas. The commission also receives a lot of customer complaints, and our authority to deal with customer complaints really depends on what authority the legislature gives to us. Like all state agencies, we start out with no jurisdiction whatsoever. We only have the jurisdiction that the legislature expressly or fairly gives to us in statute. So if the legislature decides to give us water, we would ask that you spell out exactly what authority you are giving us. If you want us to resolve consumer complaints, you would typically want to say that in the bill. If you only want us to set rates, terms, and conditions, then say that in the bill. Let me give you a little background on rates and rate making, so you have an idea of what is involved when we do that. As I said, rates have to be just and reasonable. That's sort of our catchphrase for that. And that applies to both the customer and the company. Customers obviously want or prefer lower rates, but they also want good service. When it comes to the companies actually have a constitutional right to earn or be given the opportunity to earn at certain levels. The rule of law essentially is the companies have to be given a reasonable opportunity to earn a reasonable return on their investment. It's kind of like the takings clause in the Constitution. If investors are putting up capital to provide a service, they are generally entitled to earn a reasonable return on that, or at least be given a reasonable opportunity to earn that return. If they mismanage it, that's on them, but at least the state has given them that opportunity to earn a reasonable return. When the commission makes decisions on setting rates, we can't be arbitrary in doing it. We have to do it based on evidence that's in the record, because any decision that the commission makes, because there's a constitutional tie from the standpoint of the utility, they can appeal or take us to court. So, part of our core job is getting the evidence together to back up what we set as the just and reasonable rates. And that's where the process gets a bit complicated. Typically what we do is we use what's called test years, where you take a year of what it costs the company to provide their service and run their business, and we look at the amount of usage that customers have and try to set rates that will recover all of those costs that the company has, or at least give the company, like I said, a reasonable opportunity to recover all of those costs that it has. And I'll bore you just a minute with a little detail just so you can get a flavor of what we do. So the formula that we have to follow is essentially we're trying to derive revenue requirement. Revenue requirement is what we call the pie. That's the amount of money the company is entitled to be given the opportunity to try to recover during the year. And the revenue requirement is their operation and maintenance costs, plus their depreciation and amortization, plus their taxes, plus their rate of equity times their rate base. And I'll take just a minute and walk through that real briefly. So O&M is, you know, the expenses that the business has. We typically have to look at multiple years of expenses to figure out what a fair and reasonable O&M is, because sometimes you look at just 1 year of O&M, you have outliers, you have one-time costs. Say once every 5 years the company updates some system, you wouldn't want the entire 5 years embedded in just 1 year's worth of rates. So we typically do a review of several years of operation and maintenance costs, come up with what O&M we should use to calculate the revenue requirement. Depreciation and amortization, every asset, you know, a lot of businesses, and I would assume water's like this too, where they invest in pipes and machinery and stuff. Oftentimes each different type of pipe, each different kind of machinery could have a different useful life that you use to depreciate it over time. And in rate making, you typically want the useful life to match the depreciation expense that you allow them to use on an annual basis. If you depreciate something too quickly, you're essentially making current customers subsidize future customers. If you depreciate something too slowly, you're going to make future customers subsidize current customers. So you want to go through and use appropriate depreciation lives for all of these assets, and that's one of the things that the Commission typically sets for regulated companies is what these lives should be. With taxes, they are entitled to recover taxes from customers. They've got state taxes, federal taxes, property taxes, you know, anything else. The rate of equity, typically if they're making capital investment from a constitutional standpoint, they're entitled to earn a profit on the amount of equity that investors are putting in. They're typically also entitled to recover their long and short-term debt. And so, you know, we typically go through a process of setting a weighted cost of capital. You know, to make it really easy, if their reasonable return is 10% and their cost of debt is 5%, and half of their investment is done with capital, their own capital, and half is done through debt, then their weighted cost of capital would be 7.5%. Now, sometimes, and I don't know how water companies typically deal with short-term debt, sometimes you factor short-term debt in there too. It's usually a much smaller percentage, but you know, that's something, if this was given to us, we'd have to figure out how that worked. And then the last part is you multiply that rate of return times their rate base. Now, rate base is all of the undepreciated investment that they have. So all of the cost of those pipes, all of the cost of that machinery, if they have trucks and things like that, all of that might be in rate base. The difficult part with rate base is they're not entitled necessarily to everything that they spend. It has to be reasonable and prudent. But that's not something you can know just by looking at an accounting ledger. You know, if it shows they spent $1 million for these lines, that doesn't tell you whether that $1 million was a reasonable amount to spend. It only tells you that they spent $1 million. In fact, it really only tells you that they say they spent $1 million. You know, so traditionally the Commission does periodic audits of things, does prudency reviews to make sure that the assets really are, you know, a reasonably constructed amount of money involved. And once you get that, once you calculate that revenue requirement, like I said, the pie, the amount of money they're entitled to try to recover during the year, then you have to look at their usage. And I'm assuming they have, residential customers, they may have commercial customers, some of them may even have industrial customers. And so you have to develop a rate design, which is how do you slice up that pie between the various customers? And some of that pie is going to be recovered in the amount of water they use. But maybe there's fixed base charges that they also charge everybody just for being connected to the system. So you want the math to work out so that the amount of money they're expected to recover under reasonable normal circumstances equals the size of that pie. Now, the way we do that with the companies we currently regulate is we start off by setting uniform system of accounts. If we have multiple companies that we regulate and we want them, every time we see them, for them to be doing their accounting the same way, we adopt uniform system of accounts that say, here's how you account for different types of expenditures so that when we see your books, we know what you mean and you know what you mean. And if there's, 10 other companies like you that we're also regulating, we can compare because you're all using the same type of accounting system. It'd be really difficult to try to do this if you had, 20, 30 different companies and they all use completely different accounting systems, and every time you saw them, they changed their accounting system. You wouldn't have consistency. You wouldn't be able to figure out what they were doing. The problem with uniform system of accounts is, my guess is these water companies today don't all use the same accounting system. And they may have a regulatory expense of changing how they do their accounting so that if we were regulating them, they would be in compliance with the uniform system of accounts. And if we're requiring them to do it, that's going to be a reasonable expense that then they're going to expect to be able to pass on to those customers. Another thing we typically do is we adopt what we call minimum filing requirements, MFRs. When companies make rate filings with us, we know there's certain data that we're going to have to see. And so we adopt rules typically that say, okay, if you file a rate case, here's all the information you've got to, all the different schedules and accounts and numbers that we're going to need to see to start our analysis of what you're doing. And again, that's something that companies don't currently do today. So that could be an additional expense for companies. Now, when we get all this information, as I said, the commission decisions can be appealed. So the commission typically uses, the commission's required to use a hearing process under the State Administrative Procedure Act in rate making. And the staff at the commission plays an advocacy role in those proceedings. So the company makes their filing, they've got all of the initial information. We've told them, okay, we want you to file these minimum filing requirements, but that's typically only the start. Once staff gets minimum filing requirements, we usually have to go through a discovery process to get more information so that we can, try to verify the numbers in their minimum filing requirements, but also make sure that, if they say, they spent $1 million on O&M this year, were some of those expenditures one-time costs that shouldn't be recovered in just 1 year. Once we do the discovery, the commission has hearings where potentially the water company would have to put on expert witnesses, staff would put on expert witnesses, and then the commission would weigh all of that evidence and make a ruling as to what just and reasonable rates should be set for the company. In order to do hearings like that, we use typically analysts like, accountants and other types of financial analysts. We use engineers who can look at the systems that the companies say they're using. And we use attorneys to actually do the hearing, cross-examine the company witnesses, present the staff witnesses. We also sometimes have to use outside consultants for certain types of niche areas. There's some expertise that we typically have to use enough that it makes sense to have in-house people with that expertise. We have other types of niche areas like, how, if a often in like setting the reasonable return on equity, we typically use, niche financial analysts that's all they do. And we don't do that enough to have inside ROE witnesses on staff. And the company in these processes, may also need expert witnesses. So that can be an additional expense for companies. So the reason I mentioned the additional expenses is, simply because we regulate somebody isn't going to necessarily mean that at the end of the day, we're going to issue a decision that lowers their rates. We might lower their rates, but I can't sit here today and say, that we would. Now, I'll give you a brief example. So we have a natural gas company called Liberty Utilities, and they provide gas service in Gainesville and Columbus. And Liberty Utilities is 1/10 the size of Atlanta Gas Light. And Atlanta Gas Light is essentially 1/10 the size of Georgia Power. So Liberty is 1/100th the size of Georgia Power. When we do a Liberty rate case and a Georgia Power rate case, for outside consultants, it usually costs us $300,000 or $400,000 to do a Liberty rate case. For outside consultants for Georgia Power, it typically costs about $750,000, $800,000. So even though Georgia Power is 100 times bigger, their cost is not 100 times more. In other words, little companies can be disproportionately impacted by the expense of complying with regulatory requirements. So that's just something that you want to be aware of, that if you are going to give us jurisdiction over water companies, be aware that a lot of small companies may have a lot of expenses that are sort of disproportionate for their size. But anyway, that's an overview of what we do, and I'd be glad to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Bond. We've got some light ups here. Is it Chairman Camp, 24?
Thank you, and thank you for being here today. And that was a great overview of what the Public Service Commission does, so thank you for that. How acquainted with you are with private water systems? Do you have any vast knowledge of them?
I do not. I go to periodic utility conferences, and once in a blue moon, there'll be like an hour period where there's no natural gas seminar and no electric seminar and no telecom seminar, and I'll find myself sitting hearing about lead in water. But I've never regulated water and never taken any classes on, how to go about dealing with them.
All right, thank you. If I could follow up. One question that kind of came up when you were talking about the disproportionate nature of, it costs $700,000 roughly for Georgia Power and a regulatory, and then a small 1/100th of the size company, Liberty, is about half of that. And I totally get that, because attorneys charge by the hour, so do accountants, so do specialists. I 100% get that. I guess my question is, do you have an opinion, or do you feel qualified to give an opinion on what size systems should be regulated and what size should not? For example, I know someone who lives in a neighborhood and there's 40 houses and they have a private water system, and they get it from a well, and it goes through EPD, and they've got good quality water, but they of course have no way to talk to anyone about rates outside of that company. That's really small. But then you look at some of the companies, I hate to keep throwing Lake Oconee out, but they service a lot of customers. Do you have any opinion on what size it becomes completely in an unable situation for a smaller company to have regulatory industry and still perform.
Yeah, I don't have enough information about the industry or how correct or incorrect their current rates are to have an opinion as to what a reasonable size cutoff would be. You know, I do know that it makes a difference in the size, but whether it's 1,000 customers or 5,000 customers, that I don't know, because I'm not, it seems like the pertinent question would be is, are there water companies that have rates that are really out of whack? And how big are they? And I don't know that any of the water companies have rates that are out of whack. Sometimes, the cost to serve, like with the companies we do regulate, the cost to serve can vary a lot based on factors beyond the company's control. And I don't know whether it's the case, but while I was sitting back there, I heard that the Oconee uses lake water, and lake water costs more to process. Is that why their rates are higher? I don't know. It could be a factor in it. It may not be. It's like, providing, doing underground utilities can vary a lot based on, are you digging through stone? Are you digging through clay? Are you digging through dirt? So I don't have enough information to have an opinion on that.
All right, thank you. And can I have one more, Mr. Chairman? All right,
Yes, ma'am.
so most of what the Public Service Commission regulates would be monopolies. If you're in a power area or your pipes for natural gas. And so that's one reason why you regulate. Is it your understanding that most of these private water providers are actually monopolies? I couldn't get water from somewhere else, and oftentimes there's HOAs involved that say that I can't dig a well. So isn't it true that most of the time the customers have no choice on where they get their water?
That's my high-level understanding of it.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Dickey?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to follow up a little bit on what Chairman Camp was talking about in the last question. PSC, and thank you for that presentation, very helpful, regulates single providers, and it's sort of the, such as Georgia Power, that's got dedicated territory. We don't want duplicate infrastructure that's very expensive. And it's not a question to you, maybe we got lead counsel over there could tell you these water systems don't have dedicated territories, I don't think, by law. So I guess my question is, could municipal or county or public systems come and put duplicate water lines beside the private system? I guess that's my question. That would be an alternative for these customers to petition their county or municipality to come and put their system where they have a choice. I know in my area we have a choice right now for high-speed internet from two providers hanging on a pole right outside, running down our street. And so I just want the committee or a council to kind of answer that question at some point, if it hadn't already been answered.
Can we get a response on that? Okay. Okay, thank you. Anything else, Mr. Chairman?
No.
Okay. Representative Ridley.
Thank you for, let me, some questions that I had. So whenever you're talking about like a company making an investment, and I know right now y'all do power companies, for example, what's the terms? Is it on a rate of return on stuff they're purchasing? Do y'all look at a 5, 10, 15-year return? Does it depend on what the initial cost is on stuff? I mean, if a power company's buying power poles and they turn in they spent $5 million on power poles and they're not using them all right now, does that $5 million, does that look at a 5-year return to break even on it, or how do y'all determine that?
What we would match that to the depreciation life of the power pole. Okay. So let's say power pole has a 20-year life. the first year the power pole is in rate base, the entire cost of that power pole would be in there. So when they first spin it, it all goes in. Then you depreciate away 1/20th of that each year, and they get that as a depreciation expense that goes into O&M, and they earn their rate of return on the remainder. So they would earn their rate of return on, 19/20ths of the cost, until it depreciated away over the 20-year period.
Okay, and then and I guess that's how you determine, everything's gonna have a useful life. You're going to have to determine, what that is, what product, if it's a machine or if it's a pipe in the ground, it's gonna be a different useful life.
Yeah, and sometimes it can be in categories. We might do a depreciation life for a whole category of expenses, not too granular, but granular enough that it's basically accurately reflecting, so you don't have, current customers paying for future customers or vice versa.
So when you said that they may be using, and you may be using it for an example, I think, but you said they may be looking at a 10% return on investment, but by the time they get done, it might be a 7.5. So I guess that would be the same as like a cap rate of 7.5. Is that?
Like if let's say Georgia Power's weighted cost of capital is 8%. And you have to use a bit of math, but I think around 56% of their capital structure is equity. So they would be earning their return on equity on 56% of it. Their return on equity, I think, is set to 10.9%. And then the other 44% would be their cost of long-term debt. Cost of long-term debt is probably around 4.5%. So they're essentially earning 4.5% on the 44% of it. Now, when they collect that 44%, they just turn around and pay the bank. So they're not keeping that. The only part that they keep is the equity portion.
Okay. And I guess my last question would be, if you did take over something like this, is there a capital requirement that they're required to set aside to, if they run into some issue down the road, that they'd be able to continue in business with? Is that something that y'all would look at regulating? Or is that a requirement now for some of the businesses y'all regulate now?
Well, with all of the businesses that we regulate, I mean, one of the issues we always look at is their financial viability. Obviously you don't want monopoly providers to be precarious and go bankrupt. Now, how we handle that varies based on the nature of the industry. Like with gas marketers that don't have a lot of capital investment, gas marketers are typically required to have bonds with AGL, because AGL has given them portions of its capacity, and if you had a gas marketer mismanage and go belly up, and suddenly AGL has to go back and get that capacity back and reassign it to other marketers, they need some ability to have, to go after the marketer to protect their system and to protect customers. It's a customer protection thing, not really an AGL protection thing. With somebody like Georgia Power, obviously we don't need to have a bond for Georgia Power. They've got billions invested in Georgia. They're financially viable. We review their viability all the time. So that's not something that we need them to post any kind of bond for or have a set aside, because they've got the wherewithal to follow through on what they need to follow through.
Well, can I follow up? And I get what you're saying on those two industries. I mean, let's just say gas. They're buying it. It's coming in a pipeline. Somebody's going to get it. So if the economy turns bad, you're still going to have gas coming through that line. To the people to heat their homes. Power's the same way. It's going to be coming through a line, so somebody's going to be getting it. If it's a co-op or if it's a Georgia Power type situation or whatever. But I guess with a private company like this, what I'm saying is I was in the banking business for 12 years during the good times and the bad times. They're solely pulling the water out. They're solely treating the water. They're solely distributing the water. If they get in a financial bind and they don't have capital set aside, then what happens when, I don't know, a water treatment plant machine goes down that's $6 or $8 million or whatever? What requirements or what safeguards would be there to make sure that those people would still be able to get water?
Yeah. And again, I'm with the water industry, I'm not real familiar with it, but we do have industries where bonds are required or parental guarantees if the parent company meets certain requirements. If having technical and financial viability is something that is an issue with water companies, it might be, and you do give it to us, you might want to expressly say in the bill, the commission has the authority to set requirements to ensure that companies maintain financial viability. And that way the commission could look at the issue, and if bonds were needed or set aside or something like that was needed, the commission would have the jurisdiction to do it.
Okay. And my last question, if I could. This is my last one. If y'all take over something like this in the legislation, we could determine if we'll require them to have a board, what that board seat would be paid, where those expenses couldn't be jacked up by paying board members or executive directors and that kind of stuff. Would that be something that could be regulated in that too, or is that something that's normally regulated in it, I guess?
Typically what we do is we regulate the money end of it. So, you could have a small company, if let's say they overpay somebody, the commission can disallow the expense. So they're essentially overpaying on their own nickel. They're overpaying using the return on profit portion, we don't let them run it through O&M.
I got you. Okay. That's exactly what I was doing. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I've got a quick question. I know that there are some PSCs for certain states that regulate water companies. At Georgia, are we in the minority that we don't regulate water?
That's what I have heard. I've not done any independent research, but I've been told that majority of states do regulate water.
Okay, you say the majority of states do regulate water?
That's what I've heard.
Okay. One other question is, what if something happened with legislation that we did regulate water? What do you think would be the budget requirement for the PSC to do a good job?
Well, a lot would depend on how many water companies you decided to give us. If there's,
I know you can't pinpoint it, just ballpark.
Yeah.
What do you think you need?
Yeah, I mean, my assumption would be if you gave us a decent, sized chunk of the water industry, that we would need to create a new unit at the commission, a water unit. So we'd need a unit director and an assistant unit director, two engineers, 2 analysts. We'd probably also need an attorney, and we'd need 2 consumer affairs specialists. So those are the people that interact directly with the customers calling in. I think the figure we had calculated for that, not grossed up for how you gross salaries up. Just the salaries, I think we came up with 650,000, 700,000, right in that ballpark. I believe the current gross up rate is 1.7, so that would be a little over $1 million.
Okay.
That's what it would cost to have a new unit about the size of our telecom unit. So that's smaller than our natural gas unit, smaller than our electric unit, but about the size of telecom.
Okay. I had some other blinking lights. Did y'all?
That was my
Okay.
question.
Was it? Okay. All right, good. Mr. Chairman, would you like to add anything or?
Sure.
Okay.
Tom, thank you. That was a great job. We're very fortunate to have Mr. Bond. He's been with the commission a long, long time. But even with his experience, I think he would be the first to tell you he doesn't know anything about regulating water. And we don't have a water expert, so we would, it would be, I'm just gonna be honest, and I don't want anything that I say to be taken as a for or against whatever y'all are considering, because we will do whatever y'all instruct us to do, obviously. But I will say that the potential for us to regulate private water systems is a little bit overwhelming just because we don't have that experience. We would have to bring in a consultant with that type of experience to help us set this new unit up. It would take some time. It wouldn't be something that you could just start in 6 months, because you'd have to hire personnel. You'd have to make sure you're hiring personnel with experience. I mean, there are some similarities in regulating an electric company and a water company in terms of just the basics. But we're really good at what we do, I think, in terms of regulating a Georgia Power with 2.7 million customers. And those are complex cases that we do typically every 3 years, and it follows a 6-month case before that where we dealt with the resource planning that is statutory, that we call the Integrated Resource Plan, where you deal with the generation needs on a 20-year outlook. And then you take the cost impacts of that, and that also goes into the rate case, along with, say, for instance, what we're going to be dealing with next year is storm recovery with a price tag of over $1 billion from one single event. So there's a lot of differences, but one of the things that to me is one of the biggest questions that I have personally is, how do you deal with a company, for instance, that has, in this case with water companies, it's very typical for one company to have a whole list of companies underneath it, different, in this case, private water systems for different parts of the state. So would you set a rate for each? I mean, I think in looking at some of the numbers I did get my hands on, you've got one company that may have 35 to 40 other companies underneath them, different water systems, different names, different addresses, different regions, different customers. And those, you can't necessarily, I know there's probably some ways to simplify it in terms of looking at it as a whole, but we talked about this earlier. You're going to have different rates possibly for somebody in different regions of the state just because of the availability of water in this case, the cost of that. So you would have to have the water company. I know it's probably easy to think, well, you could simplify this and cut the cost for these water systems in terms of what it takes to go through a regulated rate-making process. But there's only so much you can cut. I mean, you've got to do cost of service studies. You've got to look at resource planning. You've got to look at quality. You've got to look at reliability. And those come with a cost. We are a quasi-judicial commission. So like Mr. Bond said earlier, any decision we make is made based on what is on the record in these cases. And it has to be, because any decision that we make can be appealed because of the way we're set up through the Administrative Procedures Act. Any decision we make can be appealed over across the street at Fulton County Superior Court. And so we have to make sure that the decisions we make can hold up to any appeal based on what's on the record. So not only do you have a water company in this case that would have to hire counsel, engineers, do cost of service studies, all of that, but there's also the potential for them to have additional legal cost if they decide to appeal a decision. And at the end of the day, based on what happens across the street, those costs go into the rate base as well, potentially. And so I said this at the last meeting, and like I said, I don't want this to be taken that I'm trying to tell y'all not to do this or to do something, but I just want everybody to understand that, I'm going to say it again, that just if you go to a regulated model, Some customers' bills will likely go up when you guarantee a rate of return. Particularly with smaller systems who have older systems that there's no more depreciation and so forth. It will be very complicated, and that's why you just can't regulate a customer a system with a small number of customers and expect them to go through this type of legal process without cost. And what Mr. Bond said about the cost to set up a new unit, that's a moving target, because like he said, it would have a lot to do with how many systems based on that size and that threshold, and also how you define how you handle a system with all these multiple water systems underneath them. Do you have a separate case for each one? I mean, we regulate basically Georgia Power, AGL, and he mentioned the smallest is Liberty. That's the investor-owned utilities that go through a rate-making process. So our day-to-day is dealing with the disputes and things more so than we're not in a rate case every month. But if you go to regulating, 100 different companies, yeah, we would basically be having a rate case all the time.
I hear you, but let me ask you this, but don't you agree that our constituents and our residents deserve some sort of elected oversight?
I think that the consumers of the state deserve everything that they should get to make sure that they're being treated fairly and that they're paying a fair rate.
Okay.
For sure.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Bond. That was a great presentation, very educational. Are there any other comments at this time, or if not, do you have a comment?
Are you ready for that comment?
Well, I'm gonna open it up to our speakers. Okay. All right. All right. At this time, we've got a sign-up sheet. Mr. Adam Schaefer, the floor is yours. Are you gonna go to the podium, or you rather come to the table?
I'll just come here if that's
Okay, that's fine. Yes, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Chair Rhodes, Commissioner Shaw, members of the committee, I appreciate your time. I'm Adam Schaefer. I'm the president and CEO of Piedmont Water Company, and appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all today. I believe you all received a copy of a memo that loosely follows my notes, so I'm going to go through some of that. Certainly I've heard some things that may change what you all want to talk about, and I will be open to any kind of questions that you might have. Just a little bit of history about us. We opened our company in 1992, and we bought community water systems in the Lake Oconee area. We now have 71 systems in 14 different counties in North Georgia. We have about 35,000 users, which equates to about 16,000 customers. And I think an important point to make right now, based on some of the questions y'all are asking, we have those 71 systems. We have at one end of the spectrum 10 customers that are very rural, that have, 2 wells, a well and a backup well, all the way up to the rental system, which we all heard a lot about in the last session, that has 5,000 customers, a relatively new surface water treatment plant. I think we're the only second private company in the state that has surface water treatment. So when you think about that broad spectrum, and then we have systems of various sizes in between, Reynolds is the only one that has a surface water plant. We have about 250 wells on those 71 systems. We've been operating in Greene and Putnam counties, which is, of course, where the last meeting was, for the last 30 years. We have worked very well with those counties through the years. We have strategic partnerships with both. In Greene County, we're right in the middle of expanding our lines into areas that are undeveloped and tying systems together. The water fairly large water project we're about to complete, and the county initiated the same for sewer in that same area. In Putnam County, they have their own water authority called the Eatonton-Putnam Water and Sewer Authority. It was started in 2007. We were a part of its creation. We sold them some customers to help them get their system going because they needed revenue. And we basically drew a line in the sand, and we took part of the county and they took part of the county. It's, it doesn't keep any others from coming into our area, but we work closely with them. We actually just did an extension of an agreement with them for another 20 years, and we're buying surface water from them to put into our system. We already buy some surface water from them. In our last meeting, there was a lot of focus on the Reynolds system. That the vast majority of those folks that were speaking were Reynolds customers. Several of them are very high irrigation users, and I kind of wanted to put some of that into context. We, particularly this summer, we've seen extreme usage. We have a small percentage of customers that are using in excess of 70,000 gallons of water a month. In the month of June, we saw our average usage in a non-irrigation month go from 500,000 gallons up to 1.5 million gallons. And we had some days where we were peaking out at 3 million gallons, which actually forced us to turn on our backup wells in order to supply that use. And during that time, we had 10% of the customers that used half the water on the system. Those are extreme conditions and very unusual for any water system. So supplying that irrigation and while making sure people can take showers and have their in-house usage, everybody wants to, it's a challenge for us. And we are seeing, as y'all know, pretty heavy growth in the area, particularly since the pandemic. We've added 6,500 new residents in the area. And just in the past 5 years, we've invested $40 million in the water and sewer infrastructure to keep up with that growth. So, where do we go from here? I mean, we're, on rates, we are trying to support that growth, and with our rate base, we have contracts in place that kind of limit what we can charge, and those are with developers and homeowner associations, as y'all pointed out. We're trying to keep rates affordable. At the same time, we're trying to recover the cost on those upper tier usages, which are really straining the system, particularly the Reynolds system. And so a lot of the noise that we have experienced has been around that. I think some of the things that you guys were saying, and we focus on it a fair amount, is you've got customers over here who are on a very small system, rural, who have expectations, and then we have a broad variety of customers on different systems, and we try to operate our systems as if we're one company from a customer service standpoint. Primarily, we do have different billing structures for the different customer bases. Reynolds rates are higher to help us pay back the costs associated with primarily the surface water plant, which we were not. We built that plant 2 years ago at a cost of $15 million. Before that, we had 25 wells supplying those at the time, roughly 4,000 customers, and really, frankly, the usage was so extreme that we were seeing degradation in the quality of the water in the wells. We heard a little bit about iron and manganese. The extensive pressure on the system, on the aquifer, was really making the water quality degrade, and we basically determined that we had to build this plant if we wanted to, get better water quality to folks, and it has, by and large, fixed that. For example, our builders in that area no longer spec water softeners or filtration on their new homes because the water quality is more similar to what a lot of the people that have moved there are accustomed to. Many of them have moved from cities and aren't accustomed to well water. So there were a lot of things that were said that in the last meeting that we don't consider to be factual, and I want to make sure that we tell you our, kind of thing that we think are misconceptions. Our rates are fair. We have been increasing them here recently, particularly to try to keep up with the capital improvements we've just talked about. But we are competitive, and we try very hard to keep the minimum rates and lower tiers lower for those people who are just using, for their primary in-house potable usage. Our tap fees, which are a big point, and y'all heard about that some in the last session, they are comparable. We have the same restrictions on our tap fees that we have on our water rates. Our maximum tap fees are on the Reynolds system. We're charging $5,500 for water and $6,000 for sewer. Nearby Jackson Water Authority is charging $9,500 for water and $10,000 for sewer. And Bryan County in the south part of the state is charging in excess of $20,000. Our commercial rates are comparable to other growing municipal systems. We have restrictions on those as well. And a lot of times the grinder pump, which is a sewer pump that most of the homes down there require to get their sewer out of the house, we install those and maintain them. They're technically a part of our permit, and we provide 24/7 service, so we like to keep control of that. But those are, a lot of times, are categorized as a tap fee, which is inappropriate. Our rates are governed by agreements. We have long-standing agreements, particularly with the planned communities, but we keep our rates as standard as we can. The highest rates we have are on the rental system because of the level of service they're being provided, but we have longstanding agreements that have been in place since our beginning that keep us from charging more than surrounding municipalities within a radius. And by and large, we try to stay below the highest where we could be. A lot of times we'll hear the water's free and it's all profit. And water is a very, very expensive, some say the most expensive utility to equip and maintain. We have significant cost in energy, treatment. We pay Georgia Power, despite what you've heard, for our water withdrawal out of the lake. And just the maintenance of infrastructure, the maintenance CapEx is significant. We're obviously here today because of increased regulation on water rates. As you've heard from some others, we also believe it would inevitably increase the cost to the consumer. I mean, there'd be cost for us, just like setting it up at the state level for us to, hire consultants and have our business underwritten to make sure that we met those standards. In our last meeting, we had a consultant who spoke towards the end, who we had brought on. His name is Chuck Loy, and he's a nationally recognized water rates expert with a company called GDS Associates. We paid him to underwrite our business. He got all into our audited financials and worked with our senior staff to underwrite our business. And he determined that if we were regulated based on some standards that we assumed might be put in place based on what we see in other states, that our rates would actually go up based on the capital investments we're making. So we're very proud of what we do. We take a lot of pride as a company and as frankly as a family to be involved in the areas that we're in, and provide the service that we do. We are not perfect. We are always striving to get better, particularly at the customer service, on the customer service front, and we have continued to see, increased demands. I think the phrase in the last meeting was, I'm paying Ritz-Carlton rates and I want Ritz-Carlton service. We are certainly not there. They are an aspiration, but we are not perfect. We are working on some things that we're going to put in place over the next, that are happening now and over the next few months. We're in the process of opening a new office at the lake. It's under construction right now, where customers can come in and not only pay their bill, but we're going to have a dedicated area that we're calling the Learning Center that'll have, water meter assembly, cutouts of a sewer line, cutouts out of the E1 pumps, which is a big piece of confusion for folks. But it'll be a place where customers can come in either by appointment or not and just learn more about our business. And clearly education is something that we need to continue to get better at. We already have started in the last month or so sending field technicians by appointment to people's homes, and with their permission, coming on their property and talking to them, helping them find leaks in the yard, talking to them about their water quality in the house, helping them with, as the best we can, advise them on irrigation, which is obviously a very big point of issue for folks. We really, if you can't tell, we obviously irrigation, we're selling a lot of our water, but it's a lot of stress on us as a company. We would prefer to, be at a place where things are more steady from a usage standpoint. And then lastly, we are going to set up a customer advisory committee, which will be, we'll have quarterly meetings. We'll be make it up of customers, not just the ones who are friendly to us, but hopefully a good cross-section of customers. I will participate personally, and really we want folks to come bring their problems to us that they are either hearing or not getting resolved for themselves, but we want to be able to talk with them about issues that we're facing that we maybe don't have the answer to. So we'll be starting that in the first quarter of next year. And I thank you for your time today. We're very proud of what we do. We know we can be better, and I'm happy to answer any questions that y'all may have for me.
Thank you, Adam. I just want to say thank you for coming today. And I know you and I have spoken numerous times in the past, and service was an issue. And I just want to say thank you for taking steps to improve that process and customer relations and the way that they can get to y'all and talk and get those problems solved. Because I think that was a big point of frustration that you and I hear a lot about back at Lake Oconee. I know we've got some questions, but I just want to say, do you have, and I hope you do, have plans to adopt an irrigation plan next summer?
Well,
Tell them when they can't irrigate and things of that nature. I think that would help a lot.
Yes, we did this summer as well. We historically we've gone by whatever the state is issuing, and there were no state mandated odd evens or no irrigation. We did go odd even when we saw things really spiking in June. I mean, June was extreme, July was not, August was extreme. And so, but frankly, a lot of the heavy users are not there. I mean, a lot of these are, some of the bigger homes down there that are heavy irrigation users off lake are vacation homes. So a lot of times, we would see people watering every day when we knew that, we'd already put out an odd even, and we do our best to contact them, but, I believe, yes, we need to communicate more with customers about helping them with their usage. Some people do care about the cost, some people don't. And so I hope I answered your question.
You did. One other question, just help me clarify, because you hit on it a little bit, and it's one that I get almost daily. I know you've got your tap fees in there, and I know y'all, the grinder is not a tap fee, but it is associated with the hookup of your water and sewer. And I get this all the time, and I just want you to walk me through it. And I know different homes are different costs with different terrains and distances and things y'all have to do and go. But I hear all the time, Trey, I wrote them $24,000, $32,000 check 9 months ago. They're holding up my CO. I can't get my CO. They won't come. What is the process of when somebody gives you, because the builders tell me too, we have to pay them up front 7, 8, 9 months ahead of time. Blah. Walk me through that process.
Sure. So typically the home builder in most cases will give us a call, and we have an established process with them, and most of them are pretty accustomed to how it works, but they will call us and say, okay, I need a water tap now. We're just beginning the house, and I want to go ahead and get on the schedule for my sewer connection, which in most cases is an E1 grinder pump. And so we have a dedicated rep that just deals with builders and kind of watches their schedule. But the grinder pump, the water tap usually goes in at the beginning when people are building homes, so they can, they need it for building a house. The wastewater is not needed till the very end, and these grinder pumps sit just outside the house, and the outfall falls into the grinder pump, and then there's a small diameter line that runs from that pump up through the yard to the street and ties into a small diameter main at the street. And the timing of that needs to be just such that it goes in after the driveway and all that's finished, but before the landscaping. And in many cases, we have builders that are landscapers, the biggest landscaping companies. Sometimes they're just putting the line up to the street in for us, and we're just cradling it back just so that nothing gets hit, and it goes in at just the right time. The grinder pumps are unusual for, there's plenty of these systems out there, but most people who move down there and build a house are the sewer where they came from was either a septic tank or it was on a gravity system, and so there is no pump. It's just the outfall goes into a gravity system and it works its own way down to a pump station or a plant. But our gravity basin is fully like a coney, and so the developers figured out pretty early on that's not a viable option. And so basically all these pumps we have almost 4,000 of these pumps just on the rental system. And all of them act together to get it to a pump station, which then probably pumps to another pump station. We have over 70 pump stations at Lake Oconee, which is many times over what these large counties have. And so y'all have heard about odors. That's where it's all coming from too. And so each one of these pumps, they're on the property of the customer, and they're the property of the customer, but our read on it is they're technically part of our permit. If they fail and spill, and that spill gets into the lake, the EPD is going to come to us. So our way of managing that is we want to install them. We do provide 24/7 service. We have crews that do nothing but this, and they have an alarm. It goes off. The customer will call us, and we'll come out there immediately, any time of the day, and pull the pump out, drop a spare one in there, and usually the pump needs to be worked on, and we'll take it back and either send it off or work on it and then bring it back. So it is, to more directly answer your question, the pump, that $8,000 pump, is in replacement of a gravity line that in another development probably would have been paid by the developer. And so the capital improvement for the developer is really being put on the builder rather than, and all they have to do when they build the subdivision is just put in a small 3-inch line that pump ties into. Does that
Yeah,
I'm
I
sorry
just
if I
think
went too deep.
it's,
but-
no, it's fine. It's just a big concern. I hear it all the time of the
Yeah.
big expense up front.
Well, and I
that
think
they, and then
that
they have to wait,
it-
and sometimes it's a delay after, even after they're done, they have trouble with you guys coming back out to sign off to get CO, and that's just a complaint that I get very frequently.
Okay. Well, I will tell you, as it relates to timing, particularly the last 4 years have been, we've had a lot of people relocated to Lake Oconee after the pandemic.
Amen.
Heavy growth, which is great,
Yeah.
at a time of high inflation, Inflation Reduction Act, very hard to get your hands on water meters, very hard to get your hands on pumps. And, I mean, a lot of times we're just waiting on the meter delivery in order to get them in. And so, yeah, we hear that one too. Why can't you come put our water meter in? We ordered it, 10 weeks ago. And so a big job for us is just doing our best to manage expectations.
Okay, that's good. We've got some other questions here on Representative Buckner.
Thank you for being here. I know this can't be the most pleasant place for you to have to come, but appreciate you being here.
Happy to.
These should be relatively quick and easy questions, but you mentioned that you're in 2021. From 2020, you've had more than 6,500 new residents move into the area. What's the total number that you serve? The 6,500 plus what
Yeah,
you
we
already had?
Yeah, so we have, when I say 6,500 residents, that's number of people. So that would equate to, let's call it 2,300 new connections. And in the memo you have, I stated 35,000 users. So that equates to about 15,000 water connections.
So today, the connections that you serve are about 3,800?
We have about, our total water connections across all 71 systems are about 16,000.
Okay, how many at
16.
Reynolds?
We have a little over, we have 4,500 water connections in Reynolds.
Okay. And then I appreciate what you're offering to do with your learning center and the field reps. A lot of what we heard were people that were extremely upset with the lack of customer service. Are you, and you say you're committed to providing even better customer service, is there customer service training that's going on with your frontline staff?
Yes, ma'am.
Have you changed the number of people that answer the phone?
We've in the last 3 years, we've doubled it. We've gone from, we've gone from 2 to 5 in that department. We need to get better. I believe folks can always get more training. We have good systems in place. One of our key metrics has been we want to answer. We heard for a long time, hey, I'm waiting online for 10 minutes. And one of our key metrics, which I see every day and we're in pretty good shape on, is we want to answer 90% of our calls within 60 seconds. And we're regularly doing that. Now, are the folks always hearing what they want to hear once they get on? No. But we know we need to continue to get better.
Thank you.
Chairman Kemp down there.
Thank you so much. You look a little different than you did a few minutes ago.
Oh, all that talk about water, he had to go.
Thank you. Thank you for being here today. Again, I know this cannot be the most pleasant experience on earth. But thank you. I have a couple of questions. Do you have rate differences? Because you mentioned in your memo in paragraph 5, 10% of our customers use 47% of the water produced. That's a lot of water. So if you're a golf course, which I'm assuming might be one of the big water users, do they pay a different rate per gallon than a residential person would?
We definitely would have supply issues if we were watering golf courses. They are not a user.
That's good to hear.
Yeah. So they get most of their water from the lake. We do supply them with reuse water from our wastewater treatment for some of their needs. We do have different rate codes for the different systems. We try to standardize them as much as we can, but we are charging less for on both the minimum and the overages for the customers that are, on a smaller well system as compared to Reynolds has the highest rates. Their minimum is higher and their overages are higher because of the level of service they're being provided, and the costs associated with that. The tap fees are different too. I mean, our lowest tap fee is $1,300, which basically covers the cost of the meter and the labor to put it in on some of these smaller systems, on up to Reynolds where we're really trying to recover capital expense, and it's at $5,500. So did that answer your question?
Well, my question was, the person who's doing, using these 47% of the water, are they paying less per gallon than a residential person? Just not about the connection fees or any of that, but the bill themselves, is it apples to apples or is there a differential?
There is more on the tiers. And so a number of years ago, we adopted tiered strategy, which is really being driven by the EPD, which is called, and we get a lot of flack for this term, but it's conservation pricing. So basically you pay a minimum for, 2,000 or 3,000 gallons, which is, you're going to pay for the availability, and it covers that first several thousand gallons. And then above that, we charge on a per thousand basis, and those tiers increase as you get higher. So 3,000 to 5,000 is one rate, 5 to 10 is a different rate, slightly higher, and so on and so forth. And it does, if you use 70,000 gallons of water, it's going to be a very big number.
Yeah, well, yes, I get that.
Yeah.
But would the person using 2,000 gallons a month, which I assume would be a household, I don't know, I have a well, so I don't know. But let's just hypothetically say that 2,000 was a household and then someone was using 75,000 gallons. What would be the cost per gallon? I mean, I guess, have you, as a company,
Sure.
I'm sure you've looked at that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, okay, I understand the question. So the average household of 4 uses 4,000 to 5,000 gallons a month. On our highest rate code, they would be paying about, that their minimum would be $45, and then their rate, they'd be paying about $60 a month.
Okay.
Okay. And then, above that, they just get charged per thousand based on the usage. We do have irrigation taps and potable taps for the people who have wastewater service, so they don't pay their wastewater on their water.
So you're saying, so the highest rate, which would be residential, and you said $45 connection fee is the minimum, and then $15 would be added for the actual water. So just rounding it, it'd be about $4 per 1,000 gallons for a household.
So the minimum would be $45. They would get 3,000 gallons for that. So they'd pay
About
they would pay that
$15 a
minimum,
gallon.
regardless of how much they use, up to
100,000
3,000 gallons. So 15 per 1,000. You could calculate it that way, but they're going to pay that as a minimum just for the availability, whether they use that amount or not. But then if they go above that, they're going to pay on a per 1,000 gallon basis, which goes from $8 up to our highest tier is around $15 once you get way up into the
Okay, so
highest
about
usage.
$15 per 1,000, which means about 15 cents a gallon.
Correct.
Okay, so I'm trying to figure out, so if you're doing 75,000 gallons, what would their bill be? Not based on the rate they're actually in, not based on the numbers we just discussed.
Yeah. Trying to do the math in my head, but
I'm sorry.
hundreds to thousands. I mean, it would be let's just say 15 times. Yeah.
It'd be 15 times. So
15.
they're paying 15 cents a gallon then at 75,000 gallons.
Correct.
Okay, all right. So there's not a discrepancy between someone who's operating something that uses a lot of water per gallon versus a homeowner who's using.
Yeah, I think the curve would look like it's high in those first tiers because we just need the base minimum, and then it drops off on a per gallon basis. It drops off and then starts climbing again.
Okay, so I think that's one complaint I had received was they felt like there was a discount for the higher volume, but there is not.
No, there's a penalty.
Okay, thank
and
you.
which is what is encouraged to us by the state.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman Dickey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got several questions, but I appreciate you being here. I'm a former private system water operator, and it was a good day in my life when I got my county to put in their system. They got a grant and loan from USDA and put in a tower and pipes and fire protection in our little small community of Musella, which is they probably only got 100 or less taps in my little area. The county has got multiple systems where they did get grants and loans from USDA to put in multiple elevated tanks to serve different pockets of population in our county. But my first question is, are you legally required to serve all customers where you are, or what type of legal requirement do you have?
It's a good question. We're in the business of having more customers, so
Right.
We don't ever, if the service is available and they want to pay us for it, we happily connect them. Sometimes there are capacity issues that have to be addressed. The two issues that we would face where we would have to figure it out would be, we have a system that's at capacity. So let's say you have a 50 home subdivision or 100 home subdivision, and we have 3 wells servicing that, and we that 101th connection, a new lot next to the original subdivision wants to tie on, and we don't have capacity. We would have to figure that out, and we usually try very hard to do that. The other issue that we have is, and this is, these issues would be whether it's a private company or a municipal would be the same, but so use for example, one of our biggest rental system, there's somebody who wants to develop 100 lots, 2 miles away, and they want to tie into the system. There's always we have to figure out how to pay, who's going to pay for that cost to get it to their subdivision, and that's usually a negotiation. And, a lot of times we contribute towards it, some of it. Sometimes they pay all of it. It just kind of depends on the situation. And that is, we try to be as standard as we can, but that's really no different than what you would see with a municipality. So we kind of operate that way. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. So really, I guess you have full flexibility on rates, like Chairman Camp was talking about, a higher user. You can incentivize. Those are probably high profit customers, maybe, but you could certainly create a rate that would discourage them or encourage them, or whatever you want to do to control your capacity to serve them, I assume.
We try very hard to act like a municipal system would. There is, we hold ourselves to a high standard not to give preferential treatment to any one customer, whether it be rate or tap or kind of reservation. We try to be as standardized as we can, not only in what we charge, but how we treat the prospective customer. So our pricing is as standardized as we think we can get it. We're always trying to get it.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask another question?
Yes,
Do you
sir.
have any legal contracts? Well, I know you do, maybe with developers or with, say, Putnam County, for territory that exclusive you that would prevent any other competitors or any other government from coming in and offering duplicate service?
We're not aware in the state of Georgia there being any. Our impression when you're regulated is typically a part of that goes with is a franchise area. We do not have those in Georgia. So we have some agreements with Greene County and Putnam County about generally where we're going to operate. Those agreements can't keep another private or municipal for that matter, coming into our area. For example, we have a hotel that's about to be built in our area. We've made a proposal to them to extend service several miles to service that. They are now deciding whether, we haven't been told, but they're deciding whether they're going to build their own system or accept service from us. So can others decide to come in and just run lines next to ours? In many cases, they can. In some of these subdivisions, they would be precluded from that because of the agreements we've signed. But out in the counties and rights of way and those kind of things, we don't have an exclusive.
Do you have right-of-way easements from private property owners and public county or city?
Some of all. I mean, depending on where we are, but every time we do a project, we have to go get an easement from either the DOT or the county, or sometimes we will buy private easement if it's what makes sense.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Ridley.
What did you say y'all's average charge was per gallon?
So we're charging on our minimum, it comes out to about $15 per thousand. We're basically charging $45 for the base minimum. And then above that, I think the first tier drops down to $10 per thousand from, 3 to 5, and then it increases from there. Our highest tier is 15.
So just an average homeowner that probably don't do a whole lot of irrigating and all that stuff, they probably use 3 to 5,000 gallons
That's
of
right.
water. Mm-hmm. So what does that bill kind of look like?
Depending on the system, $60 to $70.
Okay.
And if they have sewer, double that, right?
Yeah,
It'd be
yeah,
double.
yes, sir.
That's
yeah.
right.
Because in Chatsworth, their water system's about the same. I talked to my guy; they're about 14,000, and ours is about half of what. Yeah, I mean it's about $40.
Yeah.
On average, like that. So that's one reason. But y'all are private, not public. So are y'all subject to? I know like public is subject to FOIA request. You could do a Freedom of Act request. Are y'all under that?
We are not.
Okay. And then, just out of curiosity, you was talking about y'all built a plant 2 years ago, it was $15 million. And you probably heard me ask the PSC guy this. What do y'all look at as y'all's break even on that? Like, how many years do you try to get that where it's paid for?
Depends on the growth, but we're hoping for, on that one, 7-8 years, it'll start paying for itself. It really, if we were going to, that was an investment in the community that we said we're going to be here for a very long time, and those folks need better water quality, and the place is growing like crazy.
Okay.
And so either we were going to do it or somebody else was going to come along and, we want to give folks the best quality that we can for the price that we can charge, and hopefully they say, okay, we would never need the city because we have Piedmont Water. That's obviously not the case with everybody, but I will tell you, we began in '92. In the late '90s, we started taking these small lake communities and with our own capital started, and the county's approval, started tying them together in the county and state rights of way, putting up the overhead towers, building sewage treatment. Between '98 and 2004, we invested tens of millions in order to get that base service set up in both counties, and then the recession happened, and then so it just took a while.
Right.
And this is a very capital intensive, and I suppose that if we were regulated, we probably would have said, well, here's what's needed and here's the rate. And it would have been far higher than what we were charging at that time. So you got to be patient in this business, and we still like doing it. Mm-hmm. Did that answer your question?
Yes, sir. And my last question, if I live over there, can I dig a well, or how does that work?
So in most of these subdivisions, we have what's called a water service agreement that either we or our predecessor signed with the developer that kind of lays out our obligations as the operator and the landowner's obligations as a consumer, and those, it's like a covenant that runs with the land. It also, in most cases, lays out what we can charge, what our limitations are. But in most cases, those say that you can't drill a well, that we're going to be the sole provider for water services. So yeah, I mean, in most cases, no. There are some cases where folks have drilled wells.
Well, I guess, didn't we pass something that said that they can't, or the cities can't prevent you?
We did. It was SB, I think 181, Lee Anderson, and then I carried it in my house.
Was that just,
It was over an acre, and it only was for a municipality could not prevent
oh, okay.
someone.
Yeah.
I looked it up a few minutes ago.
Well, I guess my question, I mean, you sit here and y'all say that y'all pretty much strained on water and consumption and that kind of stuff. And if somebody wants to water their flowers and they're bitching and moaning about the price of it, I mean, I'd be happy to go out there and just drill my freaking well just to get them to be quiet about it. You know, I mean, so, I mean, it just kind of, to me, it seems like you got a monopoly, but then you tell me I can't even drill a well on my land and I mean, I understand you're gonna sign, it's like mineral rights, you're gonna sign it going in, but is that something y'all do when y'all go into a subdivision, is say, hey, listen, we're gonna come in here, but you're gonna have to sign an agreement that nobody can drill a well?
I would say that in most cases that, particularly on some of the smaller lot subdivisions, the cost for the benefit on a well, to have a well and then drill it, which is expensive, maintain it, pay the power on it, and then have to worry what's going to happen with that resource versus just buying water from us. We don't face that much because in most cases we do have people say, I'm going to drill my own well, and we never hear much about it because they determine financially it doesn't make sense. There are some larger lots, particularly in some of these planned communities, where folks are using a really large amount, where I have heard recently, and there's been discussion about the legislation y'all passed, I think it was 2 years ago, and whether they can or can't do that. I mean, we're obviously not gonna help them do it, but we're not, I haven't seen it occur yet. Because I think that, just from my own perspective, I believe that they're kind of going through that cost-benefit analysis.
Mm-hmm.
Will we see it? Probably. You know, I think it's kind of a little up in the air about what we could or couldn't do about that,
Okay.
frankly.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Kent?
Thank you so much. I do have a follow-up based on Chairman Dickey's and Representative Ridley's comments. How is it disclosed to a homeowner? I know, a public utility, it's very easy to see, your public utilities, Atlanta Gas Light pipes, or is it propane? Is it Georgia Power or an EMC or a MEAG? Those are easy things to determine. How is it disclosed to someone who is purchasing a house that they use a private water system?
So typically they'll be guided to either by the agent or their home builder to, typically the service is already, if it's a new home, it's already been set up in the builder's name and they'll turn it over and put it in their name. And we send them a pretty extensive package that lays out what we do, how they can contact us. We try to send as many people to our website as possible. We obviously need information from them about, in order to set up their account. But we're always trying to push people towards our website for educational things. Obviously rate is a piece of that. We don't just put it, we do have different rate structures. We try to say, hey, go to our website so you can see what your rates are. I would imagine a follow-up question is, well, how do they know when they get a rate increase? Like a lot of municipalities, we put it on the bill that there's a rate increase. This year, we sent letters to each of the homeowners by snail mail, and that's probably someplace we can continue to do better.
Okay, thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
If I could just follow up. You mentioned that you have a covenant with the developer that you were going to be the water system, and it runs with the land. So I'm assuming, and I don't know if you know this or not, this is a legal question. I'm not an attorney. I'm assuming you're not either.
I'm not.
But is it disclosed to them that they are behooving, I mean, they're tied to your private water system forever because of this covenant that they did not enter into with, you know, individually? It was done for them in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Are they made aware of that?
It's a good question. It is, I believe it's laid out in the deed and transfer of ownership of the property. I have frankly heard, hey, you need to be forthright in trying to tell people before they even buy a property that you're a private water company that's going to supply. And I don't really know how we would go about doing that. But I think it's a good question. I'm not a lawyer either.
Just because I think we all understand, you know, Atlanta Gas Light Pipes or Atlanta Gas Light Pipes, you do have a choice in your energy company as far as gas is concerned. And if it's Georgia Power on the meter or whatever the power company is on the meter, then you know that's your company because of legislation that exists. But as a private water system, you'd really have to seek that out prior. And I'm sure a lot of people that are moving here are not really acquainted with private water systems coming from other areas of the country. So that would be a challenge, just as a consumer to understand where, you know, the system and, you know, I can't get another water system because of covenant that was signed 5 people ago that I had no control over, and I can't dig a well because of covenants in the neighborhood as well. So that really leaves them no choice but to have to work with a private company that has no regulation.
On rate.
On rate. All right, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Chairman Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Schaefer, I'll echo what's been said. Thank you for spending this time with us today. I've got a question that'll show my ignorance for this, but I think you mentioned something earlier about the fact that if let's say some of your customers where your high usage is due to the irrigation, do you have a separate meter for the irrigation? And if so, is that a lower rate for irrigation? Is it a different quality of water? How does that work?
The water is the same, comes off the same system. We do have separate irrigation meters. They're pretty much used primarily in order to, and this is pretty standard in the industry, someone would determine that they're going to be a high irrigation user, and they would have a tap fee install, which is the same pricing as a water meter, but it would allow them to not have to pay for the sewer usage.
Okay, yeah. You know, it seems like just from what I've heard, particularly from the prior meeting that was held there at Lake Oconee area, that I'm just going to be frank and say that part of maybe some of your issues have been around communication or the lack thereof. And obviously this memo that you've distributed here today and the fact that, you know, where you're creating this customer care and learning center, so you're saying that's already under construction, and that'll be an actual office where people can go and interact with your representatives, and that's not something they have now, correct?
Correct. We have, until recently, we had them pay their bill by mail, online. We give them a lot of electronic options, which from our perspective has been the way of the future. And the reality is there's a lot of people that want to come talk to you and pay their bill in person. And so we've already changed that. We've given them the ability already to, particularly with some of the things that have been going on with U.S. Mail, the ability to bring their payment to our office. And so we are going to be opening up more.
Or I guess they can set it up on automatic draft and all that.
We've got all that. Credit card. We've got all
But this,
that
obviously, this is a big deal. This is
Yeah,
something
I mean,
that they've been asking for, and this.
I think, you know, we would be fooling ourselves if we didn't acknowledge that part of our issue is PR. We are, myself, our family, we're, I mean, we kind of consider ourselves low-profile people, and we just kind of want to, you know, do our business, and hopefully the customer's happy with us. And, you know, I mean, we we could have been doing a better job communicating what's going on with the business. And you've seen some of the efforts. We have a new communications director as of last few weeks, which she's present and has a pretty robust agenda ahead of her in the coming months to really just talk more about what we're trying to do and hopefully help the customer understand that better.
Well, obviously, that's basically what a lot of these folks have been asking for, so this is
That's
obviously positive. My next question would be, like, how have you communicated that? I mean, I know this memorandum basically says to customers, partners, and stakeholders. Is this something that's already been distributed to your customers, or is that something that's forthcoming?
Y'all are the first recipients, and it is going to be widely distributed after today, either through press or, directly to. We'll send it directly to customers. We have no issues with that being shared, and so we're, like I said, we need to do a better job of informing our customers generally. We know, just based on our feedback, we have a very large percentage of our customers that are happy with their service. They one thing to keep in mind is a lot of the people that live on the lake, they don't pay us for irrigation. They're getting all their water out of the lake. So in many cases, in most cases really, our customers pay minimum bill or something slightly above that. And the noise that you heard in that last meeting, several of those people that stood up have been who are speaking in favor of regulation and complaining about their rates are heavy irrigation users off the lake. And so we're apprehensive to just drop that in every customer's lap. And at the same time, we don't feel like we have anything to hide. So clearly we're going to be trying to do a better job of communicating with folks. I don't know if did that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I know that you are not run into a lot of individual situations. For instance, with water, I'm assuming I'm just using this from my own experience with my my bill with my local municipality. They're good about calling, like if you've got let's say you've got a sprinkler that's been leaking and you didn't know about it. And I know that has to happen at Lake Oconee when you got all these vacation homes and so forth. And in some cases, that's maybe not their own fault. Maybe their landscaper or something hit the sprinkler and then when it's on most of these are on a timer system. Yeah. And that already brings up another question, but yeah, I mean, how do you work with customers on things like that? I mean, we get in our consumer unit at the commission, last year we had about 17,000 calls that came in through our consumer unit. And we would expect, if you add another unit with water, for instance, that number would increase dramatically. But it's amazing the amount of calls and the volume we get, and what we try to do through our unit is work with these customers to reach out directly to the utility and try to help them mitigate that and find a compromise. For instance, in extreme cases that we've worked with Georgia Power recently after this major storm event, we've asked them to implement a moratorium on disconnects until people have a chance to get their lives back together and so forth. Yeah. And that would be, obviously, is that something that y'all look at doing?
Yeah,
and how do you work with a customer if they've all of a sudden got an excessive bill and it's not their fault?
So we do a few things. First, when we read the meters, which we read once a month, some utilities do it every 2 months. The first thing we do is we flag accounts where they're way outside of their normal usage. We will go and reread those within a couple of days, just to make sure the reading was correct. And if they're still flagged, we will call the customer, send them an email saying, hey, you might have an issue. And in some cases, if it's really extreme, and we just see the really, really high usage, we'll just go ahead and go out there and turn it off. Particularly if we have a lot of customers that aren't there, a lot of vacation homes, and we'll just turn it off and say, you need to contact us because we know you're using
something wrong.
Yeah, we also have a water loss insurance program in place where we have I think it's 95% of our customers pay in. They pay a couple of bucks a month, And they get insurance from, they have a deductible of $250, and everything between $250 and $2,500, if they can, show that they had a leak, they'll get credited back that amount.
And you
So,
said
and
most
then-
of your customers purchase that?
We have it set up as an opt-out so that
Oh, okay.
they have to tell us they don't want the service. And it works great. I mean, we have, many thousands a month of losses or it's an insurance policy, and of people who are receiving benefits, we have a lot of claims. And then additionally, the one thing we've just started, we're putting on all our new meters and by request on existing meters, but we're moving to a meter technology that has a cellular endpoint on it. So we have software, the customer can have software, and it gives them the ability to see real time, by the minute, what's going on with their water usage, which we know will be valuable, particularly to people who don't live down there. So I think we've put 5 of those on in the last week, but we've been looking at it for a while, and so we're just the beginning of starting to put that in place.
All right, well, thank you again.
Of course.
Well, thank you. I think that, are there any other questions? Adam, I just want to say thanks for coming, and I'm looking very forward to more communication with you and your dad and y'all's team as far as the new customer relations stuff. I like the sound of that. So I just want to say I appreciate that very much.
We welcome that when you're ready.
Good deal. Thank you so much. I know, Representative Buckner, you had something that you wanted to say. I just want to say with the committee, we'll be getting in touch and getting, as far as the committee findings and recommendations, we'll be communicating on that very soon. But I know you had a request, Representative Buckner.
This has to do with our final report. I was not totally pleased when I started making calls as if I was someone that needed water in the Reynolds area to state agencies. And when I called to try to find out about the former governor's office of consumer affairs, which is not in the governor's office anymore, it's been moved over to the attorney general's office, everyone was nice and not helpful in the sense that they could offer any help, really. They were nice, they talked to me, but the essence of it is if they help someone with a consumer complaint and it ends up in a lawsuit for the state, they're in a pickle because they have to represent the state. And so we really don't have an office that helps consumers in the state anymore. And it takes away a layer or a step for a citizen where they could go and report something that was wrong and maybe get some help. And it then may go up to a lawsuit and involve the Attorney General's office on behalf of the citizen or the state. But a step's been lost. And I think that is the most important step, that first one, where we can fix it without legal battles. We can fix it with agency help. We can fix it with someone just stepping in saying, I'm from the state and this person's upset and I'm calling on their behalf. I think we need to think about, in our recommendations, reestablishing a real Office of Consumer Protection in the state of Georgia.
Thank you for that.
And I'll be glad to write up a paragraph if I need to go in our report.
Well, we'll be in touch on that then. Yes, ma'am. Anything else? Questions, concerns? I just want to say thank you to the committee for coming up here today and helping me with this. And I hope we all got something, and we'll be in touch soon. And thank you for everybody coming. We're adjourned.